This week's blog post is on Jose Marti in Central Park. It's actually a page on my website rather than a blog post, and the only reason that makes a difference is that it won't appear as the most recent publication. Of the 10 equestrian statues in Manhattan, Marti is by far the most dynamic, whereas Washington, Joan of Arc, and the Cid are pretty satisfying just from a side view. This one demands that we move around it to view it from many angles. To our right of Marti, Bolivar's horse walks sedately as if on parade. To the left of Marti, San Martin's horse rears as its rider leads troops into battle. But Marti's horse is twisting like a corkscrew, eyes rolling, mane flying. Marti himself wears civilian clothes and carries no weapon. The lack of uniform or armor sets him apart from every other equestrian statue in the city except Theodore Roosevelt, who's in mufti but flanked by armed guides as he sets out on a hunt. Furthermore, Marti is leaning far to one side and has only one hand on the reins, despite his precarious situation. The other hand is clutching his chest. That gesture is the clue to the whole scene. This sculpture shows the moment just after Marti has been shot, a shot that killed Marti and terrified his horse. We saw in Erickson, in Greeley, and in Holly, all of which appeared in Outdoor Monuments of Manhattan, that a good portrait sculpture must show not only the physical appearance of the subject, but a pose or action that's characteristic of him, one that shows the sort of man he was. But no one sculpted Washington or Jefferson on their deathbeds. No one shows Nathan Hale dangling from the gallows. Yet the death of Jose Marti, 1853 to 1895, was considered a fitting subject for his portrait sculpture, which implies that his death was more important than his life. How could that be? By the late 19th century, Cuba's status as the lone colony of Spain in the Americas was intolerable to many Cubans. Reformists wanted Cuba to remain under Spanish dominion but be ruled separately. Annexationists wanted Cuba to become part of the United States. Yet another party favored complete independence. For years, journalist, orator, and poet Jose Marti organized pro-independence Cuban exiles and rebels from his headquarters in New York. He wrote, he lectured, he arranged for warring factions to meet peacefully. Marti's wide appeal and leadership made possible the Cuban Revolution that began in February 1895. By May of that year, Marti had traveled to Cuba, where military leaders ordered him to stay away from the front lines. During a skirmish at Dos Rios, Marti rode forward anyway, and he was shot. The Spanish dumped his body into a mass grave. Marti's death was indeed as important as his life. More precisely, not the way he died, but the fact that he died when he did. True, he died too early in the revolution to enjoy the glory of victory. On the other hand, he could not be blamed for the problems that plagued Cuba in the following decades. Beginning in the 1920s, Cubans of all factions began to appeal to Marti's eclectic writings to support their views. It's clear even from his early notebooks that Marti rejected the model of the United States. This is a long quote. "The North Americans put feeling after practicality. We put practicality after feeling. And if there is this difference in organization, in living, in being, if they were busy selling while we were weeping, if we replaced their cold and calculating heads by our imaginative heads, and their hearts of cotton and ships by such a special, sensitive, and new heart that it can only be called a Cuban heart, how do you want us to be governed by the laws that they use for governing themselves? Our lives are not like theirs, nor should we be so in so many matters. We feel very strongly about things. The American laws have given the North a high degree of prosperity and have also raised it to the highest degree of corruption. They have made money the chief good so as to create prosperity. Cursed be prosperity at such a cost. That's Marti writing in 1871. What Marti advocated instead of the U.S. model is not clear. Although he wrote prolifically, his suggestions changed over time and varied according to whether he was addressing fellow revolutionaries, factory workers, Latin Americans, or citizens of the U.S. Every Cuban faction could find something in Marti's writings to agree with. By the 1950s, when Huntington created this sculpture, Marti had been transformed into a heroic martyr, the architect of Cuban independence, and an inspiration to all Cubans. Huntington paid for this sculpture. Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista's government donated $100,000 for the sculpture's pedestal. The sculpture was completed and the pedestal was in place by 1959 when Batista resigned and Fidel Castro came to power. Fearing riots between Castro and anti-Castro forces, the State Department and the New York Police Department recommended that the sculpture of Marti temporarily be put into storage. Yet even the empty pedestal caused problems. In January 1960, there was rioting over the right to honor Marti's birthday by laying wreaths on it. "Assassins, murderers!" shouted pro-Castro forces. "Communists, godless blackguards," responded the anti-Castro forces. In October 1964, anti-Castroites borrowed a 6-foot plaster model from Huntington's studio, but found it too heavy to raise to the empty pedestal. They positioned it on the sidewalk, quote from the New York Times, confident that the 600-pound statue would not be easily carried away by the police. Continuing the quote, this is actually Gay Talese. 4 hours later, the statue was easily carried away by the police. End of quote. The monument was finally set on its pedestal and unveiled in 1965. Anna Hyatt Huntington, that's her on the far left, lived from 1876 to 1973. She was a native of Cambridge, Massachusetts, and became renowned for her animal sculptures. Joan of Arc in the center was her first major commission. In 1923, she married railroad heir Archer Huntington and came to share his passion for Spain, producing an ensemble for the Hispanic Society of America courtyard that includes the Cid. Marti, her last major work, was completed when she was 82 years old. Characteristically, Huntington was not only brilliant in her execution of the horse, she was one of America's great animal sculptors, but also she was very thorough in her research. The plants below the horse's hoofs are native to Cuba, helping create an exotic setting for a figure who's dressed in conventional 1890s business attire. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week.